Good morning, my friends. Welcome to SJ Weekly. What is this, the 6th? The 7th? I forgot it. But it's for August 5th, 2018. And listen to this. That is the sound of a delicious morning coffee. And yeah, I'm kind of a coffee fag. I definitely like to indulge in a morning coffee. It's one of the few pleasures left in life, it seems. But let's start with the Washington Post. And I'm actually doing this incognito mode because they don't like ad blocker, which I did finally get, and they don't like the fact that I've looked at too many articles on their site this month, even though it's only been 5 fucking days. So, is your spin class too young, too thin, and too white? The epitome of first world problems. As boutique exercise studios expand at a rapid clip, some are questioning who's welcome. After a few committed months of hot yoga at a studio in New York, Christina Rice had found her niche. So when the studio announced that it was offering teacher training, she signed right up. It was only when she arrived with her mat that she noticed something striking. There were 54 other women and men in the 10-week course, and not one of them looked like her. She was the lone African American in the class. I did bond with some of the other students, says Rice, but I did feel very isolated at times. There were no teachers of color. I didn't have another woman who looked like me, who understood my struggles, my insecurities. It's just yoga, dude. Do you really need to be performing yoga of color? This really sounds like an entitled, frankly rich black woman complaining that there aren't more entitled, rich black women for her to hang out with. If you went to, any of the United States' poor black population, they would laugh this woman out of the hood. Boutique workout studios, specialized exercise-specific gyms, are exploding in gentrifying urban areas. Well, maybe that's why you don't see many black people there. They include not only hot yoga, but also CrossFit, which is everywhere, Barry's Boot Camp, Soul Cycle, or Orange Theory. They are the modern answer to the sprawling, soulless gym, which insists on financial commitment, but doesn't really care whether you actually work out. In the boutique world, you make reservations. You're greeted with smiles. You're served an ice-cold glass of the spin class as self-care Kool-Aid. This really sounds like somebody who just couldn't make it at a regular gym. Gyms can be sprawling and they can be soulless, but they require you to be the engine, not some kind of external force. The point of a gym is that you go and work out, and you have to push yourself to work out. And if you're incapable of pushing yourself to lift those weights, and you need something like, say, a boutique workout studio where you have somebody leading you in the exercise, of course, if you want to pay your money and go do that, it's your right? But this really sounds like it's looking down its nose at gyms, and by extension, the people that can actually self-motivate. And here's where we can see that having a leader in your exercise is actually a privilege. But some people have begun to question the stark differences between the studios and the neighborhood YMCA, like the prices. In Washington, a single 50-minute Barry's Boot Camp class is $34. Spinning Studio Flywheel charges $30. Solid Core can run them as much as $37, or about half the cost of a monthly membership in most urban gyms. That's because these places come with trainers built into them. If you go to a gym with a trainer, it's going to be a lot more expensive than if you just go to a gym and follow a workout that you found on Fit or something. And like Rice, other fitness junkies have begun to notice who isn't coming. Sweat through a class in one of these studios and it's very possible that you'll see it. Many lithe young white bodies and few people of color, or older or heavier exercisers. Maybe it's because, as you said, this is happening in young white gentrifying areas. Maybe it's because of privilege that only rich white kids can afford. Maybe it's because older people generally don't want to take care of themselves, or at least not in this manner. Usually old people don't work out, or if they do work out, they go to gyms. But Long, who is African American and Hispanic, is struck by what she sees there. What is their messaging saying about aging? What is fit? What is beauty? I look at everything from the signage to the marketing materials, and all she sees are millennials. How open and inclusive is that? Well, I mean, what do you want to do? Do you want to force old black people at gunpoint to come to these gyms? Stanley, who has gained some fame with her criticisms of boutique workout and yoga culture's lack of diversity, describes the studios she has visited outside the big city bubble as anything but diverse. She tackles the subject in her book, Everybody Yoga. The issue, she says, extends beyond race. I definitely want to find a copy of this book now. Oh, there's actually an Amazon link. Well, I'm not going to pay for it. She's often the only fat woman in the room as well, she says, and if you're looking for a mature crowd, you have to keep looking too. By the Health Club Association's reckoning, the average age of studio exercisers is 30. The messaging, says Stanley, is essentially, you're allowed in this space if you're white, slender, able-bodied, and less than 45, cisgender, and heterosexual. And if you're not, then you're not welcome. Except, Stanley, you look like somebody who is none of those things. And obviously you're attending these studios. Maybe it's not that people aren't allowed in these studios. Maybe it's that they don't want to go. Maybe it's that people have the freedom of choice to choose whether they want to go to an exercise studio or a gym, or to just work out at home, or to not work out at all. Maybe it's not a race and gender issue, and maybe you don't need to make everything a race and gender issue. Okay, this is stupid. I'm moving on to the next article. I skimmed the rest of this off camera, and it's all literally just the same bullshit. Blaming white people because black people don't want to attend these ridiculous fucking studios. Okay, I'm done. Well, maybe if those minorities had more money in their pockets, they would attend those studios, but it turns out that might not be the case. Finland's basic income test wasn't ambitious enough. The payments encourage beneficiaries to take work that doesn't pay a living wage. Kela, the Finnish social security agency, has failed to secure the funding it needs to extend its universal basic income experiment beyond this year. Although it's sad that this grand leftist idea is suffering yet another setback, Finland's trial effort deserved its fate. Before the experiment was approved by the government in 2016, Kela officials talked about paying €800, or $974, a month in unconditional income to test a group of working-age citizens. But by the time the program began early last year, the amount was whittled down to €560. If extended to the whole country, the cost of the earlier proposal would have exceeded the Finnish government's entire revenue. A similarly impractical approach led to the failure of a 2016 Swiss referendum on offering a payout of 2,500 Swiss francs. It's almost like if you keep giving away people's money for nothing, you will run out of money. It's all but impossible to live on €560 in Finland. A one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Helsinki rents for almost that much. So the experiment's designer settled on not really paying the UBI to the unemployed, who kept a higher level of government support, at least €32.4 a day for the first 400 days after losing a job. Only the working poor would benefit significantly from it. I'm sure that you and I know that the reason this failed is because you can't just throw money at problems and hope they go away. There's definitely a problem with grinding poverty. There's definitely a problem with people not being able to get an education or start a business or do what they want to do with their lives. But you can't just mindlessly throw gobs of cash and expect the problem to fix itself. But I have a feeling that this article, I haven't read the whole thing yet, but I have a feeling that the slant it's going to take is that they didn't give enough money. Not that the idea of the UBI is inherently flawed. Finland has a low employment rate for a rich country. Just 71% of the working age population compared with 77% in neighboring Sweden and almost 86% in Iceland. So the idea was to provide an incentive for the unemployed to step into the job market, even if it meant taking on part-time or badly paid work. The other goal was to simplify Finland's complex system of housing, childcare, and other benefits by replacing them with the lump sum payment. I don't know if giving people money for nothing is going to incentivize them to take on part-time or badly paid work. You know, the point of something like a UBI is to, one, rescue people in grinding poverty who just cannot, who have nothing, zero, just can't get ahead because they have no base with which to start. And two, it's to assist people in, you know, if they're working something like part-time work or badly paid work, it's to assist them into having a buffer so that they can maybe invest in themselves or go back to school or on the side start their business. It's to help ambitious people. However, this article and in general UBI supporters seem to assume that all people are ambitious people, which is just not the case. The UBI is not going to get people into part-time or badly paid work. It's designed to get ambitious people without resources out of that work. Keela is not promising to release any results of the experiment, nobody's surprised there, which involves 2,000 people, until the end of 2019 or even the beginning of 2020. But it was clear from the start that a basic income, even such a low one, is an extremely expensive way to boost precarious forms of employment. At 550 euros a month, Keela calculated, the UBI would cost 19.3 billion euros a year, while the government would only save 3.6 billion euros on existing benefits. As for getting people to return to the job market, the centre-right cabinet of Prime Minister Juha, I don't know how to pronounce that, Juha Sipilä, appears to be more interested in cost-effective negative motivation for the unemployed than in rewarding them for finding work that doesn't pay a living wage. The government has proposed, for example, requiring out-of-work people to apply for at least one job a week to keep receiving benefits, unless they're in job training programs. I never really thought I'd see the day that I'd be agreeing with right-leaning politicians or parliaments, but that's really how things have been going the past few years. The UBI idea is not dead. It's still worth watching other experiments, especially the ones that actually provide a living income. These include Oakland, California, which pays $2,000 a month, almost exactly the poverty line, and the one in Kenya, which pays $23 a month, about half the average income in the country's rural areas. Other tests in the Dutch city of Utrecht and an upcoming one in Ontario, Canada, I'll correct you right now, that one has actually ended and has not went well. Offer low payouts relative to the living standard, but still higher than in the Finnish test. I don't know. The UBI is an answer to the right question, but it's the wrong answer. At the very least, though, they are asking the right questions. It's not quite as bad as communists who just don't understand economics. Proponents of the UBI understand that at least people need to work, and they're saying, well, how about we just give them some money and allow them to work on what they want? Well, it's better than assuming that all people are the same, which is what communism does, but it's still not going to work, because there will be too many people who will just take the money and not work. In my opinion, loans or grants for school, or loans or grants for starting small businesses, that's the way that we should be going, because that will actually provide people who are ambitious but poor with the resources that they need to actually get their lives going. Not something like a UBI. I still can't quite tell which way this article's leaning, which I guess is actually a good thing. At least it's somewhat neutral. But here's an article that is just straight up parody, and I actually had to read the first couple sentences before I could figure it out. Fact. All tragedy happens because of toxic masculinity and lack of communism. This was during the time that the Mandalay Bay shootings happened last year. The Think Peace Factory is an overdrive over the Las Vegas massacre. Just about every thought piece you're going to read about Las Vegas will have one of two themes about motive. The tragedy happened because toxic masculinity, which is the feminist cop-out for everything, or the tragedy happened because of the lack of full communism in the presence of white people, which is the sociology pre-grad cop-out for everything. I'm sure toxic masculinity is what caused a sextagenarian to commit mass murder. It's also the reason why my crankcase is habitually low on oil, why SEPTA is late, and why my hoagie has too few jalapenos in it. The other craptastic category of hot takes is a shitty reduction of economic theory. When there are any study sources, they point to fringe theory that's not generally accepted, or it's way out of context, or it's just bad quoting and use of stats. And this article is basically about shitty clickbait. And it actually shows a real headline here. Can a shift in the perception of masculinity curb mass violence? So, yeah, people actually made shit like this back when the Mandalay Bay shootings were happening. People actually did blame it on toxic masculinity. And we have reached a point where satire of something like this article is nearly indistinguishable from the real thing. And speaking of satire, here's an article that, frankly, could be read as satire, but it's not. Women work longer as the men cut their hours. Now, this is not how this originally read. They have changed the title, and it used to read this: Women work longer hours than men. That's all it said before. And they realized that they had kind of fucked up, and here's why. A nationwide survey of 1,600 employees found that women now work almost 34 hours a week on average. half a day longer than the figure of 30.4 hours 5 years ago. Over the same 5-year period, men's average work hours fell from 45.5 hours per week to 44.8 hours. Although among the hardest working males, the number putting in more than 49 hours a week has passed the 3 million mark. So even as the headline says women work longer hours than men, immediately in the first few paragraphs, they contradict that. Women now work almost 34 hours a week. Men's average work hours fell to 44.8 hours. There is no way the headline is in any way reflective of reality, which is why the URL of the article still says women work longer hours than men, and they changed the headline because they were immediately found out as the hacks that the Daily Mail actually are. And really, if you want an explanation of the gender pay gap, it's right here. Alright? Women work 34 hours a week on average. Men work 44.8 hours a week on average. That's a pretty decent explanation, don't you think? Men are working 10 more hours per week on average. Maybe they're making 10 more hours per week worth of money on average. Or here's another reason. Almost 3/4 of those working long hours, that would be mostly men, admitted that they were likely to go to work even if they were ill, while 2/3 had gone to the office on public holidays in the past year and a half and said they would put work ahead of personal commitment. Well, there you go. Maybe that's the gender pay gap. There's a lot of things that could be the gender pay gap. How about this? Women are also more likely to be found in relatively poorly paid caring professions than men, pushing down their overall average wages. Well, it's not that women are to be found in these professions. Women choose to be in these professions. They take these jobs, they go to these schools, they choose these careers for themselves. But let's keep talking statistics with New Hampshire, 94% white, asks, how do you diversify a whole state? This is a ridiculous proposition for multiple reasons. One, locations, as in wide, huge areas of land, do not need to be diversified. You do not need to push out people who are currently living there. You do not need to force some kind of intermingling or race mixing. You just let people do what they want to do. Let them live where they want to live. In fact, as I recall, pushing out an entire group of people and replacing them with another group of people, even if you don't kill them, is still considered to be ethnic cleansing under international law. So why would you want to diversify New Hampshire? Why don't you just keep it the way it is? Why don't you allow people to move as they see fit? Catalina Celentano used to hold training sessions for hospital workers in Lynn, Massachusetts, to familiarize them with the cultures of patients from Cambodia, Russia, and the Dominican Republic. When she moved to New Hampshire, she suddenly found herself in an ethnic vacuum. Well, if being in an ethnic vacuum was that distressing to you, why did you move to New Hampshire? If you wanted to live in the culture that you were born in and raised in, why didn't you stay in the location and with the people from that culture? I went from being able to speak Spanish every day to not speaking Spanish at all because there wasn't anybody to speak Spanish to. You don't get to move to a place and demand everyone change to suit your needs. New Hampshire, like its neighbors Vermont and Maine, is nearly all white. This has posed an array of problems for new arrivals, who often find themselves isolated and alone, without the comfort and support of a built-in community. Well, that's why it's called a built-in community. Somebody had to build it. And if you're not up to the task of building a community, if you want the government to diversify New Hampshire, then you need to leave. It's that simple. It has also posed problems for employers in these states, who find that their homogeneity can be a barrier to recruiting and retaining workers of different ethnicities and cultural backgrounds. Again, that's only a problem if you care about ticking off these ridiculous boxes on a list. If you just hire the best people for the job and don't give a shit about race, none of this matters. The issue prompted about 100 business leaders, government officials, and members of nonprofit organizations to meet Thursday to search for ways that New Hampshire, which is 94% white, might lure other racial and ethnic groups as well as younger people. Maybe they don't explicitly need to do that. Maybe they should just lure people, qualified people for the jobs that they have, and then see who shows up. And if it turns out that a bunch more white people show up, it shouldn't matter. Diversity quotas are going to be the downfall of all of these initiatives. With non-whites poised to make up a majority of the American population in the next 3 decades, diversity has become a bottom line imperative for companies competing for talent, especially for workers who can speak other languages. Man, the way that the term non-whites is used there, it's almost the way that the KKK used it like 50 years ago. As it stands, New Hampshire is 3% Latino, 2% African American, and 3% Asian. The nation as a whole is 17% Latino, 14% African American, and 6% Asian. Well, that means that states that aren't New Hampshire, some other states, they have a ratio of Latinos that is higher than 17%, a ratio of African Americans that is higher than 14%, and a ratio of Asians that is higher than 6%. And nobody is calling for more white people to be imported to those states. There's no massive call to diversify the Latino and Black South right now. Nobody cares about that shit. Nobody cares about bringing white people into those states. But when white people hold a 94% majority, you gotta start bringing people in. It's a ridiculous idea. It doesn't matter. The race doesn't matter. It's not just the social justice groups that are doing this, it's the businesses. We're talking about the economic engine of our state, and we can't move forward without them. Well, you know what? The businesses are going to tank because of this social justice bullshit. It doesn't sell. We know it doesn't sell. In fact, I was saving this for a future video, but it's relevant right now, so I'll bring it up right now. Here's some bonus stuff for you, okay? This is from a study called Jumping to Conclusions, Advocacy and Application of Psychological Research in the Politics of Social Psychology from 2017. The psychologist, advancing implicit bias as the explanation for various societal inequalities and harms, jumped to the conclusion, apparently in the sincere belief, that the data would eventually support that conclusion, but it has not. The accumulated data, in fact, now shows that measures of implicit bias provide no more explanatory power than explicit bias, even for socially sensitive topics, and often provide less explanatory power. There is no reliable link between implicit bias in police officers and police violence against minorities. And there is no reliable link between implicit bias and employment evaluations or employment outcomes for women and minorities. If those behind applications of implicit bias to the law really are committed to behavioral realism, to taking science seriously and making values secondary to science, as they say, then they must accept that implicit bias has not turned out to be the explanatory juggernaut it was optimistically expected to be. Despite these now undisputed facts, the implicit bias construct continues to play an influential role in public debates, court cases, and the making of governmental and company policy. Millions of dollars are being spent on untested implicit bias training and consulting. Disposing of the mistaken belief that implicit bias is a powerful and pervasive corrupter of behavior will be slow and difficult. Now, David Arbach, who is an intellectual that I do follow and read semi-regularly, he summed this up. Implicit bias training and such measures were initially promoted and adopted with the rhetoric of profit. Diversity is good for business. Now they're being seen as financial losers and will be dropped by the same criteria. And he's replying to the tweet that says, psychologists admit that by pushing implicit bias, they have foisted a big cash destruction machine on society that won't go away easily. Whether or not implicit bias is real, bias sure is, justifying diversity programs on the grounds of profit margins was highly likely to backfire, but it's created a good deal of leftist corporate sympathy along the way. So what does this all mean? This means that implicit bias isn't real. It's most likely not real. The idea that you have some kind of subconscious or subliminal racist or sexist slants, even when you try to not be that person, it's complete BS. And the implicit bias training, like the Starbucks stuff and other stuff that we've seen, it's all useless. And it's basically a giant cash hole. And these businesses, thinking that diversity is the way forward, have been duped into shoveling millions and billions of dollars into these giant cash sinks that are basically just going straight to SJWs. They're going to like the gender studies people. They're going to the implicit bias people. They're going to the social justice warriors that write this junk and promote this junk and teach this junk. And it's going to be a complete fucking nightmare. It's already a complete fucking nightmare, but it's going to get worse because as companies realize that this does nothing and this earns them nothing, they're going to basically figure out they've been taken for a ride. You know, they have all these diversity hires that are doing nothing in their companies. And in the next decade, when they wake up to that fact, there's going to be a mass purge from these companies. And that's what's going on here in this article, the New Hampshire White Diversity article. It's not just the social justice groups that are doing this, it's the businesses. And they're doing it to their own folly. This is going to destroy these businesses. And of course, it's coming from the New York Times. And we all know what the New York Times has done recently. They've recently hired a very interesting young woman, and I may do something on her this week. But until then, I'll see you guys later. I love you.